So we've talked a lot about some of the more sort of negative aspects of being a teenager and the developments that happen during the teenage years. But there are lots of positives as well of having these changes going on. And, you know, I think you mentioned in a previous interview about teenagers being able to engage with big questions and being really interested and curious about the world. What other positives are there for working with teens?
Well, I think if you're a teacher of say 15 to 16-year-olds and upwards, then you really start to see, and particularly if you're also a teacher of them at a younger age, you really start to see this change in outlook. And instead of just receiving information and trying to understand it and learn it and do what the teacher says, that there becomes both questioning, which is good. We need young people to question things, but also to make connections. So they might hear about something on the news, or they might be learning something in history or modern studies or something, and then something happens on the news in the real world, and they can make that connection and start to have a conversation about it and start to also think about, put themselves in other people's shoes. So the ability to have empathy for someone else's situation becomes often quite dramatically, it often happens really quite quickly, that it becomes better, it improves at around about that time. And again, typically slightly earlier for girls than for boys. So that can be a great positive. Then the big questions that most of us also like to think about, they become possible for the first time really for teenagers. So things to do with death and war and religion, all of those things, the big questions that we have to think about and engage in, and that people disagree about, then those can be things which you can see the teenagers' eyes light up as they suddenly realise that they're being given permission to have views and to express themselves and to try to understand and put things in context. That all becomes possible for the first time. And they can become very interested in big international situations rather than just something to do with their own lives. And often you find teenagers becoming very interested or supporting a big worldwide international charity rather than something much closer to home. And I think those are really, really welcome, exciting signs. And they are becoming independent, so it should be exciting for them as well, scary as well. And they often can be scared about the future, because we are often scared about the future. And I think then there also, as a teacher, becomes a really important, valuable positive role for teachers in guiding young people through those new fears. And how do we tackle the fact that we don't know what's going to happen to us tomorrow, let alone in 5 years or 10 years' time? How do we know what things we can be in control of, and how do we let go the things that we know we can't be in control of?
So this is all really interesting stuff, and I think a lot of teachers will recognise it playing out in their classroom. What does all this research and all this knowledge that we're acquiring about what's going on during the teenage years and brain changes, what does it really mean for teachers of teens, and how can they use it to have more effective lessons and more positive classroom environments?
I think if we realise that if you can get teenagers on the right topic, a topic that interests them, that you really can keep their attention, that's a very positive message. And when it comes to the big language-based subjects, it means that if you've got a whole range of really interesting, endlessly interesting topics, and they can be selected to be appropriate and applicable and of great interest to whatever country you happen to be teaching in. Things to do with what's going on in the news in the particular country you're working in. And teenagers are likely to be, if we recognise that they're likely to be really interested in that, then that can become a really positive context for learning language and developing as a confident person as well.